He was just a man with tired eyes and a kind heart, walking the same stretch of sidewalk each night, unnoticed by most, unseen by many. Frank Mendes didn't carry much, just a thermos of lukewarm coffee, a quiet mind, and the memory of a wife who used to call him her anchor. But one cold evening, that quiet life collided with something raw and trembling. A boy no older than 17, curled up by the hospital gate, thin arms hugging his knees, trying to disappear into the pavement. Frank didn't ask questions. He just noticed the shaking hands, the too thin hoodie, and that awful kind of stillness that doesn't come from rest but from surrender. He sat beside the boy, wordless, and left behind a cup of coffee and something more. Presence. He didn't know it then, but that single moment would echo louder than any medal or uniform ever could. Because sometimes the smallest kindness, offered without expectation, can reach places no one else can. And sometimes the ones who show up quietly change everything. The boy showed up every night, same spot, just outside the hospital gate, where the pavement met the curb. No jacket, no backpack, nothing to shield him from the cold but his own silence and a pair of trembling hands clutched around his knees. Most people didn't even look at him. A few glanced his way, then turned their heads as if guilt might catch in their throats. But one man didn't look away. Frank Mendes, a 58-year-old hospital security guard with tired eyes and a quiet soul, noticed the boy right away. Not because the kid made a scene. He didn't. He never said a word. But there was something in the way he sat there. So still, like the cold itself had frozen him in place. It wasn't the stillness of peace, it was the stillness of someone holding himself together, barely. On that first night, Frank didn't approach. He clocked in, made his rounds, and tried to shake the image off. But he couldn't. By the third night, he stopped at the gas station across the street and bought 2 coffees instead of one. One black, one with cream, and sat down beside the boy without saying a word. He placed the coffee next to him, then went on with his shift. The boy didn't touch it, but he didn't move away either. The next night, Frank did the same, this time adding a wrap sandwich. Still no response. But the night after that, the cup was gone when he returned. Small thing. Still, it meant something. Then the weather changed. Cold turned sharp. Wind sliced through jackets like razors. On his break, Frank stepped out and saw the boy again, arms around his legs, head down, shivering. Without hesitation, Frank took off his own coat, an old, faded blue thing he'd worn for years, and crossed the street. He knelt beside the boy and gently draped it around his shoulders. "No one should freeze alone," he said quietly. The boy didn't say a word, but when he looked up, there was something in his eyes. Fright, maybe, but also gratitude. He clutched the coat tight, like it mattered. Frank gave him a small nod and walked back to his post. He didn't expect thanks, didn't even expect the kid to come back. Frank wasn't a man who needed much. His apartment was small, just a recliner, a battered old TV, and shelves of mystery novels with cracked spines. No medals on the walls, no fanfare. He'd worked factory jobs most of his life. Steel mills, warehouses, forklifts, until his back gave out. Security work was quieter, easier on the spine. The pay wasn't great, but it gave him something to do, a place to be. People sometimes thought Frank was soft. Other guards joked about his habit of handing out snacks to lonely patients or guiding lost families through the maze of hallways. But Frank didn't mind. Rosa, his late wife, used to say he had an old soul. 7 years gone, and he still made 2 cups of coffee every morning. Out of habit, out of memory. That morning, when his shift ended, Frank hung up his vest and rubbed at the ache in his back. He thought about the boy, wondered if he'd come back, wondered where he went after taking the coat. Maybe he found shelter, a warm meal. He hoped so. He didn't mention the jacket to anyone, not to the nurses, not to the front desk, not even to the guy at the gas station who noticed he wasn't wearing his usual coat. It was just a moment, a cold night, the kind of thing the world forgot. But the next morning, the world didn't forget. Frank stepped outside and froze. 4 large black SUVs lined the hospital's employee lot. Their engines were off, but military men stood beside them. Straight posture, sharp boots, clipped conversation. Definitely not from around here. One of the nurses poked her head out and whispered, "Is this a drill?" Frank didn't answer. His gut twisted. Then the lead SUV's door opened, slow and heavy like something practiced. A tall man stepped out, dressed in a crisp military uniform. Polished shoes, gleaming buttons, ribbons in perfect rows across his chest. The kind of man who didn't just enter a room, he commanded it. People stared. Someone from administration murmured, "Is that a general?" The man didn't stop. He walked straight toward Frank, eyes locked, and stood in front of him. "You gave my son a jacket last night?" the man asked, his voice steady and clipped, every word sharp enough to cut. Frank blinked. Your son?" The man gave a small nod. "Teenager, thin, silent, sat near the curb. That was your coat, wasn't it?" Frank hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, he didn't have one. It was cold." The man exhaled slowly, just once. "I'm Colonel Jacob Barrett. That boy is Caleb, my son." The name hit hard. Frank's stomach turned, not from guilt, but from the weight of it. All at once, everything felt much too real. "He showed up at our base last night," Colonel Barrett said, gesturing toward the SUV, "wearing your jacket. First time we'd seen him in months." Frank's voice came quiet. "Is he all right?" "He is now. He asked for help. Asked for you, actually." "Me?" A shift, barely there, passed across the colonel's face. Something softer. "You're the first person he's trusted enough to speak to. I don't know what you said or didn't say, but he told us someone finally looked at him like he was a person, not a problem, not a disappointment." Frank didn't know what to say. He never did when people said things like that. He just nodded, quiet. "He's inside," the colonel added. "He asked if you'd sit with him." Frank looked at the hospital doors, then back at the man. No words, just a silent step forward, and then he followed him in. Inside, the hospital room was quiet, not cold or sterile like most, but calm. A slow, steady beep from a heart monitor filled the silence. The vent hummed softly above them. Caleb sat on the edge of the hospital bed, his back pressed against the wall, arms wrapped around a fresh sweatshirt someone had given him earlier. It fit better than Frank's old jacket, but he hadn't let that go. It was still there, folded carefully by his side like it held more than just warmth, like it meant something. He looked up when they walked in. No words, just a nod toward Frank, acknowledgement without ceremony. It wasn't shyness, it was something else, a quiet decision not to waste words on things that didn't matter. Frank lowered himself into the chair beside the bed, slow, measured, as if afraid any sudden movement might shatter the fragile peace that had settled in the room. By the door, Colonel Jacob Barrett stood stiffly, arms folded, his posture all discipline and distance. "Well, you said he'd been gone a while," Frank said, his voice low, not prying, just trying to understand. The colonel nodded. "After his mother died, he started to pull away. I was overseas, deployed, missed a lot more than I should have." He hesitated before adding softer now. "He ran away 6 months ago. No note, no calls, just vanished." Caleb looked down at his hands. The colonel continued, but it was clear he was talking more to himself now than anyone else. "He went through things I didn't see coming. Thought I could fix it with routine, structure, discipline. Turns out what he needed wasn't rules. He needed someone who didn't try to fix him at all." Frank said nothing. He turned his gaze to the boy beside him, then spoke gently. "Didn't need to say anything. You just looked cold. That was all." Caleb gave the smallest shrug, barely there. "No one else saw me." "You weren't invisible," Frank replied. "Not to me." The stillness returned, this time heavier but not suffocating. Then the colonel stepped forward, his voice quiet, tight. "You don't know what that moment meant. To us. To me. You reached him when I couldn't." Frank shook his head. "I didn't do anything special. Just handed over a jacket." The colonel's jaw clenched. "In my world, that kind of thing is special." Frank looked at Caleb again. The boy was watching him now, not with suspicion or distance, but something else, something open. And then, for the first time since they met, Caleb spoke from someplace honest. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Frank came back the next day. and the day after that. No one asked him to, no one expected it, but every evening after his shift ended, he'd stop by Caleb's room with something small in his pocket, a crossword puzzle, a granola bar, sometimes an old baseball card from a shoebox back home. Never big gifts, just small acts of presence, of connection. Caleb still didn't say much, but he didn't retreat either. They'd sit together in silence, sometimes for half an hour. Other times they'd talk about nothing. Which hospital food was the least terrible, the loud nurse with the clunky heels on the night shift, how the vending machine always swallowed your dollar on Tuesdays. And slowly inside that stillness, something shifted. Something began to rebuild. Frank never asked why Caleb had run away. He didn't need to. Pain had its own way of speaking without words. One night, while they sat watching a muted TV screen flicker shadows across the room, Caleb asked, "Why did you give me your jacket?" Frank paused, thought about it, then replied, "Because I've been cold before, and I remember what it feels like when no one sees you." Caleb nodded, slow and thoughtful, his gaze fixed on the floor. "People keep trying to fix me, like I'm broken." Frank's smile was soft, weathered. "You're not broken, you're just bruised. Bruises fade. They just take a little longer." The next day, Colonel Barrett pulled Frank aside in the hallway. "He's asking for you now," he said, almost in disbelief. "Not me, not the doctors. You." Frank looked unsure. "I'm not trained for this kind of thing." "You're human," the colonel replied. "That's enough." He hesitated before continuing. "We've spent thousands on experts, therapists, counselors, specialists. None of them reached him. But today, he asked if you'd bring another crossword puzzle." Frank allowed himself a quiet smile. "He's starting to get annoyed when I mess up the clues." The colonel chuckled under his breath. "He's coming back, piece by piece." Frank looked down the corridor toward Caleb's room. He's not the only one. Friday afternoon, as Frank was heading out of the hospital, Colonel Barrett caught him by the exit. "We're discharging Caleb tomorrow," he said. "He's doing better now, stronger. We're taking him back to the base. Gonna rebuild things slowly." Frank nodded. "That's good. He's stronger than he looks." "He'd like you to come," the colonel added. Frank raised an eyebrow. "To the base?" The colonel offered a small smile. "Just a welcome event. Nothing big. Just a few people he trusts. He asked for you." Frank hesitated. "I've never stepped foot on a military base. I'm not military." "You don't need to be," the colonel said, voice steady. "You were there when it mattered. That's more than I can say for some who are." The next morning, Frank ironed the only decent shirt he owned and boarded the city bus headed toward the base. As the gates opened and a uniformed guard waved him through, he felt out of place, like a stranger in someone else's world. Everything was crisp and tight and orderly, but then he saw Caleb, standing a little straighter now, dressed in clean clothes, his face carrying a soft, quiet smile. The colonel introduced Frank to a few men from his unit, some officers, a chaplain, someone from the youth support team on base. Caleb stepped out forward and handed Frank a small pin, bronze, simple, with the words "honor in silence" etched into it. Frank blinked, unsure what to say. "You didn't have to help me," Caleb said quietly. "But you did. I won't forget that." Frank's voice caught. "You don't owe me anything, son." "Maybe not," the colonel said gently from behind him, "but we do." Later, in the mess hall, surrounded by quiet chatter and clinking trays, Frank stood watching Caleb laugh with a young staff sergeant. And for the first time since Rosa died 7 years ago, Frank felt something stir in his chest. Not pride, not even relief. Just a simple grounding feeling. Like he belonged somewhere again. Weeks passed. Caleb didn't return to school right away, but he started attending a small youth group on base, other kids who carried quiet scars from things people didn't talk about. Frank wasn't a counselor, didn't hold any degree in therapy, wasn't even on the staff roster. But they kept inviting him back. At first, he just sat quietly in the corner, sipping coffee. But the teens started to nod when they walked in. A few asked if he had a fresh crossword puzzle, and every time Caleb looked over mid-session, Frank would lift a quiet thumbs up. Nothing loud, nothing flashy, just a reminder, "I'm still here." One Saturday morning, Colonel Barrett found Frank wiping down folding chairs after a session. You ever think about doing this more often? He asked. Frank shrugged. I'm no expert. You're not supposed to be there, the colonel said. You show up. That's what counts. A few days later, Caleb handed Frank a folded piece of paper. Inside, pencil lines traced a quiet, heartfelt sketch. A man sitting on a bench in the snow, a jacket draped over the thin shoulders of someone beside him. Two figures, one act of warmth, and a moment neither of them would ever forget. Frank's fingers traced the delicate pencil lines that shaped the sketch, his gaze lingering on the image of two figures sitting shoulder to shoulder. His thumb paused over the smaller figure, Caleb, and then drifted to the larger one, hunched just slightly, wearing a familiar jacket. Frank blinked slowly, a quiet ache swelling in his chest. You drew this? He asked, his voice barely audible. Caleb gave a shy nod. It's us. That night. Frank didn't say anything. He couldn't. His throat tightened, his thoughts too full for words. Instead, he folded the drawing with careful hands and slid it into his worn leather wallet, tucking it behind his ID where Rose's photo used to be. It would stay there now, pressed between memory and meaning. A few days later, during one of their quiet nights in the hospital parking lot, Frank came holding something. It wasn't much to look at, old, scratched, a little dented, a silver thermos dulled by time and use. He held it out without ceremony. Caleb tilted his head. What's this? Had it since '91, Frank said, through layoffs, cold nights, graveyard shifts. Kept coffee in it, soup sometimes. Gave me something warm to carry when the nights felt too long. He paused, then added softly, thought maybe it's your turn now. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't need to. He stood up and wrapped his arms around Frank. Not a quick, polite gesture. Not the kind of hug that fades fast. This one lingered. Real, full of weight, full of everything they couldn't say out loud. A kind of thank you no words could match. Seasons turned quietly. Frank still worked the night shift. Same hospital lot. Same creaky vending machines and flickering streetlights. But something in him had shifted. Not so anyone could see from the outside, but enough that he noticed it every time he clocked in. Without ever speaking of it, every Sunday morning after his shift, Frank took the early bus out to the base. He didn't know anyone there or anything. He didn't go because someone asked. He just wanted to be there. He'd set up folding chairs in the youth group's room, refill the bowls of pretzels and juice, hand out crossword puzzles to the quieter kids. He didn't speak much, just gave a nod or a warm smile. But he was always there, always steady, always listening, even in silence. One morning, Frank walked in and stopped just past the doorway. There on the wall, freshly framed, was a photograph he'd never seen before. It was candid, unposed, honest. Frank sitting on a weathered bench, Caleb right beside him. Neither was looking at the camera. Both were gazing off towards something just out of view, lost in thought, in connection, in something deeper than words. Beneath the photo, printed in small, humble type, were words most people wouldn't even notice. Frank stood for a long while, his eyes not moving from that frame. Then quietly he found his usual seat in the back and sat down. He never asked who put the picture up, never needed to. Back at the hospital, everything remained oddly the same. Nurses still rushed in late with cold coffee in hand. The vending machines still jammed on peanut butter crackers. The security booth still smelled faintly of overbrewed coffee and floor wax. But Frank noticed things differently now. Sometimes he'd see someone new on the curb, a stranger with hollow eyes, a kid too young to be out this late, a parent lost in their own storm. On those nights when the wind cut through your bones and the cold settled deep, Frank kept an extra jacket folded in his locker, ready for whoever might need it. He didn't offer words. He didn't expect thanks. That was never the point. Because that winter, Frank had learned something simple and deep. Kindness doesn't have to be loud to matter. You don't need medals or titles to carry someone through their hardest night. And the smallest act, a shared thermos, a warm coat, a place to sit beside someone, can echo quietly through the life of another in ways we may never see. Frank didn't tell this to anyone. He didn't have to, but he lived it.